In this lecture, we're going to dive into something very important in programming, which is how to get input from the user. You see, most programs aren't just static. They interact with the user, taking in data and responding accordingly. This makes them much more dynamic. And to do that in Python, we use the input function. Let's start with the basics of how input works, and then we'll explore how to convert that input to different data types like int, float, and bool. Now, the input function is simple. Whenever you need to ask the user for some information, whether it's a name, a number, or anything else, you call the input function. By default, the data you get from input is always treated as a string, no matter what the user types in. And here's the trick. If you want to work with numbers or other data types, you have to convert them. Let's start with a simple example to see how this works. I have already created a file called userinputexample.py for our practices. Suppose you want the user to type in their name. You would do something like this. Let's execute it in the terminal. As you can see, it is waiting for a name by showing a prompt. Let's respond with Sophie. And then, as planned, it prints the message that includes the user input. See how friendly and easy that is? The input function pauses the program and waits for the user to type something. Once they press enter, their input gets stored in the name variable. Then you can use it however you like. But what if you need the user to provide a number instead of a name? That's when we need to convert the input. Let's say you want to ask the user for their age. Since the input is a string by default, you would need to convert it into an integer like this. This way you can perform calculations with it. I'll run the script again to confirm the functionality. Then, I respond with Sophie for the name and 30 for the age. And just for fun, she'll be 31 next year. So here we're using the int function to convert the user's input into an integer. But remember, if the user types something that isn't a number, the program will throw an error. That's something we'll have to keep in mind for error handling later on in the course. Now, it's not just integers that we deal with, right? You might also want to get a floating point number from the user. Let's say you're writing a program that needs to calculate something like a distance or a price. In that case, you would convert the input to a float like this. Before running the program again, I'll comment out the previous sections to avoid responding to them each time. To comment out code in VS Code, you can select the lines and use the shortcut Ctrl+/. Let's run the program and respond with 260 kilometers. The point 0 signifies that the data has been converted to a float. Just like we did with integers, we're converting the user's input to a float here using the float function. What about Boolean values? Sometimes, we want the user to respond with a simple yes or no, true or false. To do that, we can convert the input to a Boolean, but we need to be a bit more careful since Python will treat any non-empty string as true. Here's an example of how we can handle this. Here, we're converting the user's input into lowercase to avoid case sensitivity, and then we manually check what they've typed. Based on that, we assign either true or false to the agree variable. It's a little more work than converting to an int or float, but it's still straightforward. I just put the previous part on mute. If I respond with yes, the variable agree becomes true. If I respond with anything other than yes, the outcome will always be false. As you see, the input function combined with type conversion, opens up all kinds of possibilities for making our programs more interactive. And that's just scratching the surface of what we can do. As we progress, we'll learn how to handle cases where the user doesn't provide the right kind of input and how to make sure our programs don't crash. So, to summarize, we've looked at how the input function works and how to convert that input into different types like int, float, and bool.